My mother tapped her champagne glass with a butter knife and waited until every person at our engagement dinner was looking at her. Then she smiled at my fiancé and said, "Ben, thank you for finally giving our backup daughter her own special occasion." For half a second, nobody moved. The waiter beside our table was still holding a basket of warm bread. My father stared into his wine. My older sister, Madison, lowered her eyes, but not before I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. My mother continued as though she had just delivered the most charming toast in family history. "Madison was always our first for everything," she said. "First to marry, first to start a business, first to make us proud in all the exciting ways. Olivia was our reliable one, the daughter waiting in reserve whenever the rest of us needed help." My fingers went numb around the stem of my water glass. Beside my mother's plate was a pale blue folder she had carried into the restaurant like it contained wedding ideas. Now I could see the words printed across the top page. Family Property Purchase Agreement. Below that was my full legal name. And below my name was Ben's. That was when I understood that my mother's sudden enthusiasm about my engagement had never been about celebrating me. Welcome to Dramazy Reddit, where family loyalty sometimes comes with terms, conditions, and signatures hidden between the dinner plates. My name is Olivia Hart. I was 32 that night, and until my mother called me the backup daughter in front of 19 people, I had spent most of my life pretending that being dependable was the same thing as being loved. Ben's hand moved beneath the table and closed around mine. He leaned toward me. "Do you want to leave?" I should have said yes. Instead, I looked at the folder. "What is that?" My mother followed my eyes and brightened. "Oh, good. Since everyone is here, we can discuss it together." That sentence explained more about my childhood than any therapist ever could. In our family, discuss it together meant my mother had already made a decision and invited witnesses, so refusing would feel like a public crime. She slid the folder toward me. The top document described the sale of my parents' 4-bedroom house to Ben and me for $620,000. My parents would remain in the house for 5 years without paying rent. A portion of the proceeds would be transferred to Madison's event planning company as repayment for what the document called family-supported business development. I turned the page. There was an estimated closing date. There was a proposed mortgage lender. There was even a line showing an expected $80,000 down payment. That number mattered because it was the exact amount Ben's parents had privately offered to give us after the wedding to help us purchase our first home. We had told my parents about that gift 12 days earlier. My mother had begun planning the engagement dinner the following morning. "I'm not buying your house," I said. My voice came out quieter than I wanted, but the room was so still that everybody heard it. My father finally looked up. "Just read the whole thing before reacting." "I'm reacting to my name being placed on a purchase agreement I have never seen." "It isn't final," my mother said. "It is a starting point." Ben pulled the folder closer and scanned the first page. "You listed us as buyers. Potential buyers. You listed our down payment. Your mother mentioned that she and your father wanted to help you," my mother told him. "I assumed the money was meant to create stability." Ben's expression changed. His parents, Carol and David, were sitting 3 seats away. Carol looked as shocked as I felt. "I never gave you permission to use that information," Carol said. My mother lifted both hands. "Nobody is using anything. We are a family having a conversation." Madison finally spoke. "Mom is only trying to keep the house in the family. The house had been purchased when I was 9. Madison had the larger upstairs bedroom because she was older, and when she moved out, my mother converted it into a sewing room. My bedroom remained exactly where it had always been, beside the laundry closet, even after I moved back home briefly at 24. Whenever the dryer ran, the wall shook. Keeping the house in the family apparently meant selling it to the daughter, who had never been allowed to feel fully at home inside it. I turned another page. The proposed purchase price was almost $150,000 higher than comparable homes in the neighborhood. There was also an occupancy agreement, giving my parents the right to remain there even if Ben and I needed to sell. "This would make us responsible for the mortgage on a house we couldn't live in or freely sell," I said. My father's jaw tightened. "You would own an appreciating asset. We would own your debt." My mother's face hardened for the first time. "Olivia, do not embarrass your father." That was another family rule. My mother could insult me during a toast, but pointing at a number on a contract was humiliating my father. Ben closed the folder. "We're not signing this." My mother looked directly at me, not him. "After everything your family has done for you, you could at least consider helping." There it was. Not a proposal, not an opportunity. A test. And because I had spent 32 years passing tests, nobody admitted they were giving me. Part of me wanted to keep reading. Part of me wanted to find one reasonable paragraph and use it as proof that my mother had not brought me to an expensive restaurant to corner me into financing my sister's life. I am not proud of that part. I picked up the folder. I'm taking this home. My mother reached for it, but I moved it away. These are documents using my name. They are drafts. Then you won't need them tonight. Madison exhaled sharply. This is exactly why Mom didn't want to tell you earlier. You turn everything into an accusation. Ben stood and pulled my chair back. The waiter still had the bread basket. He quietly placed it on the table as we left, which was almost funny. Somewhere in that room, 19 people were deciding whether I was cruel, and that man was just trying to deliver carbohydrates. In the parking lot, I started shaking. Ben put his jacket around my shoulders, even though the night was warm. Has she done something like this before? No. The answer came too quickly. Ben noticed. Olivia. Not exactly like this. That was technically true, which is often how people begin lying to someone they love. 5 years earlier, my mother had opened a department store credit card using my information. She said the cashier had misunderstood and added me as the primary account holder instead of an authorized user. The balance was only $2,700. My mother paid it off after I confronted her, and I accepted her explanation because accepting it was easier than admitting she knew my social security number, my previous address, and enough personal information to apply without me. I had never told Ben. I promised myself I would tell him when we got home. Then my phone began vibrating. My father called first. I let it ring. My Aunt Rebecca texted next. Your mother is devastated. Please don't make any permanent decisions while you're emotional. A cousin wrote that family should help family. Another relative asked whether I really planned to let my parents lose their home when Ben's parents were giving us free money anyway. We had been out of the restaurant for less than 8 minutes. My mother was efficient when she had a story to control. By the time Ben and I reached our apartment, Madison had posted a photograph from the dinner. It showed my mother raising her glass, and me looking down at the folder. Her caption read, "Some people receive love and only see paperwork." I laughed when I saw it. Not because it was funny, but because my body had run out of appropriate reactions. Ben sat beside me on the couch. Tell me about the credit card. So I did. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he rubbed both hands over his face. I'm not angry that she did something to you. I know. I'm angry that you knew she had used your identity before and didn't tell me before we started combining financial information. We haven't combined accounts. We applied for a mortgage pre-approval together. He was right. I wanted him to tell me it did not matter. Instead, he asked whether my mother had ever had access to my tax documents. She helped me file when I was younger. How much younger? Until I was 28. Ben stared at me. I heard how ridiculous it sounded. I worked in compliance for a regional healthcare company. I spent my days reviewing contracts, identifying conflicts of interest, and reminding department managers that convenience was not a substitute for authorization. Then I went home and treated my own mother like an exception to every rule I enforced professionally. I changed my passwords years ago, I said. Did you change your security questions? I did not answer. That night, we sat at opposite ends of the dining table and examined the folder page by page. The first section concerned the house sale. The second described my parents' right to occupy the property. The third contained a proposed distribution of funds. $94,000 was designated for Juniper House Events, Madison's business. Another $40,000 would pay off a home equity loan. Ben pointed at a paragraph near the bottom. What is this? It was a certification stating that I held a 30% ownership interest in Juniper House Events and had agreed to personally guarantee part of its debt. I read it 3 times. I don't own any part of Madison's company. My name, address, and date of birth were typed beneath the statement. The signature line was blank in our copy. But a handwritten note in the margin said, "Updated signed version to follow." A business card had been clipped to the page. Nisha Patel, Senior Lending Specialist. The next morning, I called the number. Nisha answered on the 3rd ring. I gave her my name and explained that I had found documents referring to a loan application. There was a pause. Then her voice became careful. Ms. Hart, I will need to verify your identity before discussing any file. That was the first sign the application was not merely theoretical. After several verification steps, She confirmed that a preliminary financing package had been submitted involving my parents' property, Madison's company, and Ben and me as proposed purchasers. Did you receive authorization from me? I asked. We received documentation representing that all parties were aware of the proposed structure. That isn't what I asked. Another pause. No, we have not completed direct authorization with you. Has anything been signed in my name? I cannot make a determination about authenticity over the phone. I can suspend review and send the relevant documents to you through our secure portal. Please do that. I also asked her to note that I disputed any claim that I owned part of Juniper House Events or had agreed to guarantee its debts. When I hung up, I froze my credit with all 3 reporting agencies. I changed every password I could think of: email, banking, insurance, payroll, cloud storage, and the shared wedding planning account Ben and I had created. Then I called my mother. She answered with, "Are you ready to apologize?" I spoke with the lender. Silence. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was the most honest thing she had given me in years. "You had no right to contact them without speaking to us first," she said. "The application uses my name. It is not an application, it is a financial proposal." The lender called it a financing package. Banks call everything a package. I almost admired the confidence. Why does it say I own 30% of Madison's company? Because you helped her when she started. I designed a spreadsheet and paid for her first website. That was an investment. It was a birthday gift. Your sister understood it differently. Madison had never understood gifts differently when she was the person receiving them. "I did not authorize any of this," I said. "The lender has been notified." My mother's voice dropped. "Do you understand what you are doing to your father?" "No. Explain it." "The house is under pressure." "What does that mean?" "It means Madison's business had a difficult year, and your father used the equity line to help her through it." "How much?" "That is private." "You are trying to sell me the debt." "It stopped being private when you typed my name beside it." She told me I was being cold. I told her not to contact the lender on my behalf again. Then I did something I had never done before. I ended the call while she was still speaking. For about 10 minutes, I felt powerful. Then my father sent me a photograph of the house. The front steps were covered in autumn leaves. My mother had planted yellow chrysanthemums beside the porch, the same kind she bought every year. His message said, "I hope being right is worth watching us lose this." That was my mother's first real victory. She knew the house was not just a building to me. It was where my grandmother taught me to bake biscuits. It was where Madison and I opened Christmas presents. It was where my father sat beside me on the kitchen floor after my first serious breakup because I could not stop crying. My mother had understood exactly which memory to place beneath the debt. For the next week, relatives called with fragments of the story. My parents were facing foreclosure. Madison's business had collapsed because I refused to help. Ben's family had offered us more money than we needed. I had promised to keep the house. I was punishing my parents because I had always been jealous of Madison. That last accusation worked because it contained a small, uncomfortable piece of truth. I had been jealous of Madison. She had been the beautiful, dramatic daughter. The daughter whose mistakes became family emergencies, and whose successes became family holidays. I was the daughter who could be trusted to pick up prescriptions, update resumes, drive people to airports, and lend money without asking when it would return. I told myself I was more mature than Madison. Sometimes I even enjoyed being the one everyone depended on. Dependability had become my way of winning a competition I claimed not to be entering. The secure documents from Nisha arrived on Thursday. There were 43 pages. The earliest email in the file was dated 3 days before my mother had called to congratulate me on the engagement. In that email, she told the mortgage broker that Ben's parents planned to provide approximately $80,000 after our marriage. She explained that Ben and I would be ideal buyers because we had stable incomes and a strong emotional reason to preserve the property. The broker asked whether we had agreed. My mother replied, "Not formally. Olivia is cautious, but she does not refuse when the whole family is depending on her." I read that sentence until the words blurred. There were 3 warning signs I had ignored. The first was my mother asking for Ben's full middle name because she said she wanted it engraved on a cake knife. The second was Madison casually asking when Ben and I expected to receive our gift funds. The third was my father sending me a message asking whether mortgage lenders still required 2 years of tax returns. At the time, I had treated each question as separate. Together, they formed a plan. The file also contained an appraisal estimate, valuing my parents' house at $478,000. The proposed sale price was $620,000. The difference would cover the equity loan, overdue property taxes, transaction expenses, and the $94,000 transfer to Madison's company. Ben read the figures beside me. They want us to overpay for the house, let them live there for free, and transfer part of our mortgage money to your sister. Yes. And your mother thinks the down payment from my parents makes it affordable. Yes. He stood and walked to the window. I need to call my parents before she does. My mother had already called them. Carol answered Ben's call in tears. My mother had told her that I had agreed to buy the house, but was afraid Ben would object. She said the purchase would give us an immediate family home, while preventing my elderly parents from being displaced. My parents were 59 and 61. My mother had also asked whether Carol could send the gift directly to a closing company to prevent last-minute confusion. Carol had not transferred anything, but she and David were alarmed enough to contact the mortgage advisor who handled our pre-approval. The following morning, our pre-approval was suspended until the disputed financial information could be reviewed. That was my mother's second victory. Ben and I had planned to make an offer on a small brick house near his school district. It had a narrow kitchen, terrible wallpaper, and a maple tree in the backyard that Ben loved. By Saturday, another buyer had placed an accepted offer. Ben did not blame me for losing the house. That almost made it worse. He blamed the situation I had allowed to remain possible. I need you to understand something, he said. Your mother did this, but every time you hid one of her previous violations, you protected the conditions that let her try again. I crossed my arms. I was the person she violated. I know. You're talking like I caused it. I'm saying I don't know what else you haven't told me, because you were trying to keep the peace. There is nothing else. You said that in the parking lot. He was right again. I hated him a little for being right while I was already in pain. That was another feeling I am not proud of. We were supposed to pay the second installment for our wedding venue on Monday. Instead, Ben asked if we could pause the planning. Are you ending the engagement? No. Then why pause it? Because marriage means trusting the person beside you with the parts of your life that can hurt both of you. I trust that you love me. I don't trust that you will tell me the truth before your family's crisis reaches our door. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell him how difficult it was to grow up in a family where privacy was treated like disloyalty and boundaries were treated like punishment. But explanations were the language my mother used whenever consequences approached. So I said, that is fair. The words felt like swallowing glass. On Monday morning, I canceled the wedding venue. We lost $2,000. The coordinator asked whether I wanted to transfer the deposit to a future date. I told her no. Not because I believed Ben and I were finished, but because I needed to stop using a wedding date as evidence that everything between us was fine. For 2 nights, Ben stayed with his brother. I remained in our apartment, with the pale blue folder on the dining table. Without the noise of defending myself, I could finally see my part clearly. I had wanted my mother to choose me. Not eventually. Not privately. Publicly. I had imagined my wedding forcing her to look at me the way she looked at Madison. I thought if I created a beautiful enough event, became successful enough, and married someone kind enough, my mother would finally treat me as the main daughter instead of the reliable substitute. That was why her sudden interest had worked. I had noticed it was unusual, but I wanted to believe I had finally earned it. The folder did not only expose my mother's plan, it exposed the bargain I had been making with myself for years. I would keep providing access, money, silence, and forgiveness, and one day my family would reward me with the love I thought everyone else received automatically. That day was not coming. Once I accepted that, my goal changed. I no longer needed my family to admit I was the better daughter. I needed my name removed from documents I had not authorized. I needed Ben to know everything. And I needed my mother to understand that access to me was no longer guaranteed by biology. I sent Ben a written timeline. It included the store card, every financial request my parents had made, every document my mother might still possess, and every account where I had ever reused a password. I did not soften anything. Then I filed an identity theft report regarding the disputed business guarantee and provided the lender with a signed fraud affidavit. I contacted a lawyer through my employee assistance program. She explained what I should document, which statements I should avoid making, and how to notify the lender without accusing anyone of crimes I could not yet prove. Most importantly, I stopped arguing with relatives. Whenever someone called, I used the same sentence. My financial information was used without my authorization, and I am handling it through the appropriate process. Some people demanded details. I repeated the sentence. Some accused me of sounding rehearsed. I told them I was. 3 days later, my Aunt Rebecca asked to meet. She chose a coffee shop near my office and arrived carrying a paper envelope. Rebecca had been seated beside my mother at the engagement dinner. She had laughed weakly after the backup daughter toast, then spent the rest of the evening staring at her plate. I should have said something that night, she told me. Yes. She looked surprised that I agreed so quickly. I thought your mother was being insensitive. I didn't understand the rest. She pushed the envelope across the table. Inside was a printed email from my mother. 2 weeks before the dinner, my mother had asked Rebecca, who worked as a legal secretary, whether she could witness signatures on a family property agreement. Rebecca told her all parties needed to sign in front of the appropriate witness. My mother responded, Olivia is difficult when she has time to overthink. We may need to have the signatures acknowledged afterward. Rebecca refused. Why didn't you tell me? I convinced myself she was speaking hypothetically. That was convenient. Rebecca nodded. Yes, it was. She did not ask me to forgive her. She simply allowed the shame to remain where it belonged. That was more helpful than an apology wrapped in excuses. The following week, my mother announced a family reconciliation dinner. She chose the same restaurant where she had held our engagement celebration. Her invitation said she wanted everyone to resolve the misunderstanding privately and lovingly. Then I learned she had told relatives she would be presenting a revised purchase agreement. I agreed to attend under one condition. Everyone who had received her version of the story had to be invited. My mother accepted immediately. She still believed public pressure belonged to her. The private room looked nearly identical to the night of our engagement dinner. White tablecloths, low candles, bread baskets placed at careful angles. My mother sat in the same chair. Beside her plate was another pale blue folder. Ben came with me, but we arrived separately. We had begun speaking every day again, though he had not moved fully back into the apartment. Carol and David sat across from my parents. Madison was beside my mother. Aunt Rebecca sat near the end of the table. My father looked exhausted. My mother opened the conversation. We are here because a private family effort was misunderstood and turned into an unnecessary financial accusation. She placed one hand on the folder. The revised agreement removes the business language Olivia found confusing. I didn't find it confusing, I said. She ignored me. It also reduces the period Robert and I would remain in the home. We are trying to compromise, even though this entire situation has been painful and humiliating. Several relatives nodded. My mother had always been strongest when she could present surrender as aggression and control as sacrifice. She slid the new folder toward me. I did not open it. Instead, I placed my original folder on the table. Before we discuss a revised agreement, I want to understand the first one. My mother sighed. We have already covered this. Then the answers should be easy. I removed the appraisal page. What is the current estimated value of the house? My father answered. Approximately $480,000. And what price did you propose selling it to Ben and me for? My mother said. The price reflected future value and family considerations. $620,000. I placed the proposed distribution page beside it. What was the additional money intended to cover? Madison shifted in her seat. My mother said, obligations connected to the property. And $94,000 for Juniper House events. That company employs people, Madison said. 3 part-time employees, I replied. And according to the documents submitted to the lender, I supposedly own 30% of it. That was an accounting structure, my mother said. Who approved it? It was never final. Who created it? The broker proposed several options. I removed the earliest email from the folder. The broker asked whether I had agreed. You replied that I had not, but that I would not refuse if the whole family depended on me. The room went quiet. My mother's eyes moved to the email. You obtained private correspondence. The lender provided the materials submitted in connection with my identity. It was an informal message. It was also written 3 days before you congratulated me on my engagement. Carol spoke next. You knew about our proposed gift before Olivia and Ben had agreed to share that information outside the immediate family. My mother looked at Madison. Madison looked down. I mentioned it, she said. I didn't think it was secret. My mother recovered quickly. We were discussing ways to keep 2 families secure. There was no malicious intention. I placed Carol's printed messages on the table. Then why did you tell Ben's mother that I had already agreed? Carol read one aloud. Olivia supports the purchase, but may become nervous if Ben focuses too heavily on technical details. Ben gave a short, humorless laugh. I am a school counselor. I'm not exactly known for aggressive technical analysis. My mother's face tightened. I was trying to prevent unnecessary conflict. You were creating different versions for different people, I said. She turned toward the relatives. Do you see what she is doing? She is taking every imperfect phrase and treating it like evidence of some conspiracy. My father finally spoke. Diane, did Olivia agree to the purchase before the dinner? My mother looked at him. We had discussed the importance of keeping the house. That isn't what I asked. No, she said. She had not formally agreed. The room changed. Not dramatically. Nobody gasped. Nobody applauded. One cousin stared at the table. Another began scrolling through the documents I had copied. My uncle whispered something to his wife. Some people still looked unconvinced. That was fine. The truth did not need a unanimous vote. I removed the certification, stating I owned part of Madison's company. Madison, did you believe I had agreed to become an owner and guarantor? She rubbed her thumb against the edge of her napkin. Mom said the website money and the work you did could be treated as an early investment. Did you believe I knew about the guarantee? She said you would understand once the house transaction was explained. So, no. Madison's eyes filled. You always act like helping me is something you were forced to do. Sometimes I offered. Sometimes I was pressured. Neither gives you ownership of my name. My mother reached for the folder. This is enough. No. One more thing. I looked at Aunt Rebecca. She placed the email my mother had sent her on the table. My mother read the first few lines and went pale. Rebecca spoke quietly. You asked whether signatures could be acknowledged after the documents were completed. I told you no. I was asking a procedural question. You wrote that Olivia might need to be presented with the agreement when everyone was already gathered because she overthinks when she has time. My mother looked at me. For the first time that evening, the softness disappeared from her voice. You would have refused without even considering what your refusal would cost us. Yes, I said. I would have refused. The answer surprised her more than any document had. My entire life, she had relied on my need to prove I was reasonable. She expected explanations, apologies, and negotiations. A simple refusal gave her nothing to reshape. My father leaned back in his chair. Diane, how far behind are we? She did not answer. He looked at Madison. How much did we borrow for the company? Madison began crying. The equity loan was $170,000. My father had known about the loan, but he believed Madison's business would repay it after a major corporate contract. That contract had been canceled 7 months earlier. My mother and Madison continued paying operating expenses with borrowed money while hiding the scale of the losses from him. The house was not yet in foreclosure, but payments were overdue and the lender had issued a formal notice. My mother had decided that selling the house to me at an inflated price would solve every problem at once. My parents' debt would be paid. Madison would receive enough money to keep her company open. My parents would continue living in the house. And Ben and I would carry the mortgage. In my mother's mind, this was not theft. It was efficiency. We built that house for our children, she said. Why is it wrong to expect one of our children to preserve it? You didn't ask me to preserve it, I said. You asked me to finance everyone's decisions while calling it an opportunity. You have always been the stable one. That does not make me the backup account. Madison covered her face. My father looked older than he had 2 hours earlier. My mother sat completely still. I pushed the new folder back toward her without opening it. I have disputed the loan documents. I will not purchase the house. I will not guarantee Madison's business, and I will not authorize the use of money from Ben's parents. My mother's voice cracked. So you are willing to let us lose everything? No, I am willing to let the consequences remain with the people who made the decisions. She stared at me as if I had become a stranger. Maybe I had. Or maybe I had finally stopped performing the version of myself she recognized. My father asked whether I would help them review their options. 6 months earlier, I would have agreed before he finished the sentence. I will pay for one consultation with an independent financial counselor, I said. I will not manage the process, lend money, or communicate with creditors for you. My mother laughed bitterly. One appointment. How generous. It is what I am offering. And if I refuse, then I will respect your decision. That was the moment the power changed. Not when the emails appeared. Not when Madison admitted what she knew. It changed when my mother realized refusal would no longer force me to increase my offer. Ben and I left before dessert. In the parking lot, He reached for my hand, then stopped. Is it okay? Yes. He held it. We did not discuss the wedding that night. We discussed passwords, credit monitoring, and whether I could accept that some relatives would continue believing I had abandoned my parents. I told him I did not know yet. He said that was the first completely honest answer I had given about my family in a long time. The lender closed the disputed application and confirmed in writing that I had no ownership interest or guarantee attached to Madison's company. My parents sold the house 4 months later through a normal listing. After the mortgage, equity loan, and overdue expenses were paid, they had enough left for a small 2-bedroom condominium. Madison closed Juniper House Events. She found a job coordinating events for a hotel, where someone else controlled the budget, and saying, "We'll figure it out later," was apparently not considered an accounting method. My father attended the financial counseling appointment. My mother did not. For a while, she sent long messages, explaining that everything she had done came from fear. I believed her. Fear explained her choices. It did not authorize them. My father and I speak occasionally now. Our relationship is careful and limited. He has apologized for allowing my mother to make me responsible for decisions he did not want to confront. I have not forgiven him completely. I am no longer pretending that partial forgiveness is a moral failure. Madison and I did not become close after the business closed. Real life is rarely that symmetrical. She apologized for assuming my help would always be available, but she still believes I enjoyed making her look foolish at the reconciliation dinner. Maybe a small part of me did. Growth does not remove every ugly feeling. Sometimes it only prevents the ugly feeling from choosing your next action. Ben moved back into our apartment after 6 weeks. We attended counseling before discussing another wedding date. 10 months later, we married in a small garden behind a local library. Carol brought flowers. David cried before the ceremony began. Aunt Rebecca sat in the second row. My father attended alone. My mother declined the invitation. I expected that absence to destroy the day. It did not. It hurt, but pain and destruction are not the same thing. A year after our wedding, Ben and I bought a modest townhouse. It was smaller than my parents' old house and needed new windows. The kitchen cabinets were an unfortunate shade of orange. There was no maple tree. There was, however, a narrow room at the back with enough light for a desk and a reading chair. On the day we signed the closing documents, the title agent handed me a stack of papers. I placed them inside the same pale blue folder my mother had left beside her plate at the engagement dinner. I had removed every document she prepared. On the front, I placed a new label: Ours. Sometimes I still think about the toast. For years, being called the backup daughter would have felt like proof that I had failed to become important. Now I understand that I was never a backup. I was simply the person my family expected to remain available after everyone else had used up their choices. The folder sits in a locked drawer in our home today. Not because I am afraid someone will take it. Because I finally learned that protecting what belongs to me is not the same thing as refusing to love other people. It only means love no longer comes with a blank signature line. Subscribe to Drama Z Reddit for more stories about betrayal, boundaries, and the moment people finally choose their own lives.